And I got to tell you, what a special show today. We're talking about the Rosary, the power of the Rosary. So many promises associated with the Rosary that we don't think about. But really, we need to see those promises in action because that's just our human nature. We read about a lot of things, we can intellectualize a lot of things. But until we see something in action, we're not quite as inspired. Now, we're talking about Blessed Bartolomeo Longo. Important story. This was a man who grew up in Italy. His parents were wealthy, very devout Catholics, and they prayed the Rosary together every night. What happens to Bartolomeo? He goes off to law school, and he finds the 180 of the way he grew up. He goes into Satanic cults, and he starts to participate in the occult. Not only that, but he starts bringing Christians and Catholics along with him, ridiculing Christianity, tells Catholics to leave the church and to participate in occult rites. In other words, he's literally killing Catholics, not physically, but spiritually, just like Adam and Eve, right? Oh gosh, if you eat of that fruit, no, you're not going to die, but they did die. They died a spiritual death. And this is what he's promoting. He's promoting spiritual death. He's promoting people to go into the occult rites, to leave God, and to participate in satanic rituals. Well, it doesn't get much worse than that, I would dare say. But what starts to happen? This is important because what starts to happen when we head in that direction, when we don't trust God, when we start thinking that, hey, I can handle a little bit of the occult. I can dabble in this. I need to learn about this. We convince ourselves, I need to learn about this because I need to know what I'm fighting. No, we don't. All we need to know is we pray the Rosary, we'll never have to fight that. If we focus on our sacraments, if we focus on following the Christian faith, we'll never have to learn about the occult forces because we'll be fighting it already. That's how we fight the devil. That's how we get him away. Well, what happened to Bartolomeo Longo? Because as he's doing these seances, it's easy to think and romanticize, well, he's blessed now, so he must have just decided one day, you know what, this is not good. I'm just going to start to pray, and that's that. Oh, it's not that simple. Because once we delve into sin and once we get into dark places, the devil wants to hold on. We try to leave, but he's not going to make it that simple. Let's look at what this article has to say. It says, the more he experimented with dark forces, the deeper he sank into depression and demonic obsession. Let me read that again, because this is what we got to remember. The more he experimented with the dark forces, the deeper he sank into depression and demonic obsessions. Joy, like God, were far from him. In their stead, his life was marked with extreme depression, paranoia, hatred, confusion, and nervousness. He was horribly afflicted by dark diabolical visions which frightened him and threw him into a cycle of ever declining health. He ultimately experienced a mental breakdown. Why is that important, folks? Because when you're coming to me here and I'm reading this is really what it comes down to, what we have to decide in deliverance ministry. I have to look at this and ask myself, hey, is this a spiritual issue or is this a mental health issue? Because you're going to have both. Notice he had a mental breakdown, right? What was he experiencing again? He was experiencing depression. I treat depression. Paranoia. We treat paranoia. Hatred. We don't really treat hatred. Confusion and nervousness. Yeah, we treat all that. Now, why was he experiencing this? Was he experiencing a real mental breakdown where if he were to come to me, I would treat him? Probably. I would say, hey, it sounds like you need some medication. But the reality is, hey, you also need spiritual medication. You need conversion. You're going to have both because this is really affecting your mind and it's really affecting your body. He experienced a mental breakdown. And remember, he experienced declining health. It's like when St. Paul tells us that if we receive the Eucharist unworthily, we're going to get sick. Because why? The body's going to be affected by the soul and the mind and vice versa. Everything's connected. So Bartolomeo Longo, not in a good place now. You start heading down that dark path, it's going to suck you in and it's going to make you feel awful. It says, in his darkest moments, he heard his deceased father begging him. His deceased father. He heard the voice of his father begging him to return to God, return to God. Greatly moved by this vision, he turned to his old friend, Professor Vincenzo Pepi. Vincenzo convinced Longo to abandon Satan and introduced him to Father Alberto Redente, a Dominican priest. He heard Longo's confession and brought him back to God and his church. So let's look at this. This is why this is important. When we're wondering, gosh, is it worth it to teach my kids how to pray the Rosary? Is this important at all? What does it matter? If my kids ever veer away, something's going to remind them of the voice of their father. Something's going to remind them of the voice of their mother. Something's going to bring them back to say, hey, we got to get back to prayer. And notice, when he heard the voice of his father return to God, he turned to an old friend, and this old friend brought him to a priest. This is how we start coming back step by step, right? We left the church like Bartolomeo Longo little by little. He delved into the darkest areas, but something had to be introduced into his mind, one little piece. Well, guess what? To get out of that, we got to get little reminders that, hey, I got to get back. It might be a big reminder, return to God, a vision from his father. That's a signal grace right there, divine intervention. Coming back to the church. Well, what does Longo have to do, though? He's got to do a confession, right? And bring him back to God and his church. Now, imagine here, folks, this is where the power of the rosary and the power of prayer comes in. And we're going to look at this because everything he must have done as a satanic priest, literally to offend God. There was no other reason to do it. Sometimes we fall into sin because of our own weakness, not because we're trying to hurt God. And sometimes we even fall into mortal sin because we think we know better than God, but not because we want to offend God. It's just, I think I know better. I'm going to do this. It doesn't matter this time. I've decided to go my own way. This is a whole different story. Once you become a satanic priest and you delve into the occult, you're literally doing these things on purpose to God. You're saying, God, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to beat you down. And I'm your enemy right now. That's a pretty tough place to be. But this tells me that even at that point, God will take us back. Because when did that happen? When we crucified Christ. Literally, we were against God. We were beating up God. We were saying, be quiet. We don't want to hear you. We're going to crucify you. And God still loves us enough to bring us back. Well, let's see what happened here. Remember, he just had his confession heard, and Father Redente is going to bring him back into his church. Then it says, one evening he walked near chapel at Pompeii. Longo had a profound mystical experience about which he wrote later. And this is what he said. As I pondered over my condition, I experienced a deep sense of despair and almost committed suicide. Then I heard an echo in my ear of the voice of Friar Alberto repeating the words of the Blessed Virgin Mary. If you seek salvation, promulgate the rosary. This is Mary's own promise. These words illumined my soul. I went on my knees. If it is true, I will not leave this valley until I have propagated your rosary, he said. Here we go, folks, the power of the rosary. We take somebody who had gone deep into the occult, became an ordained satanic priest. Let's not forget that, ordained satanic priest. And he decides to come back to the church. And what is he hearing? He's hearing these conversions. He hears first the words of his father, telling him to come back to God. And then he has this experience. In the midst of his despair, almost wanting to commit suicide, he hears the voice of Our Lady. Remember, he grew up praying the rosary. Didn't Our Lady make these promises that if you grow up praying the rosary, I'm not going to leave you. You're going to have my help. He grew up praying the rosary. Even if he's far away, Our Lady came back and kept her promise and said, hey, here's a reminder. Remember, you grew up praying the rosary. Come back to this. If you seek salvation, promulgate my rosary. Well, he was so moved by this that he attended a seance, and in the middle of it, he stood up, raising a medal of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and yelled, I renounce spiritism because it is nothing but a maze of error and falsehood. So what happened here? Why did he even do that? Why did he go back to the seance to do this? Because he found the truth. Notice now he could see clearly. He's talking about spiritism and seances as a maze of error and falsehood, which means confusion, and confusion leads to anxiety, and anxiety leads to poor health and poor mental health. And he's saying, I renounce all this because it's nothing but error and falsehood, meaning I have found the truth, and I'm going to keep finding the truth and going towards the truth through the rosary. On March 25th, 1871, Longo became a Third Order Dominican and took the name Brother Rosario in honor of the Rosary. He joined a charitable group in Pompeii and worked with Countess Mariana di Fusco, a wealthy local widow who he married a year later at Pope Leo XIII's recommendation. Pope Leo XIII, big Pope on deliverance. And let's look at when he became a Third Order Dominican again. March 25th, 1871. What's March 25th? The Annunciation, the Incarnation, where it all starts, the very first mystery of the Rosary. There's no coincidences here, folks. This is how it is. We start praying the Rosary, good things happen to us, and that is a signal grace. A signal grace saying, hey, on the day of the Incarnation, on the day of the Annunciation, you're going to have a conversion, you're going to become a Third Order Dominican, you're going to fully consecrate yourself in a different way. Remember, he was consecrated, he was brought into, he was ordained as a satanic priest, while Our Lady can work miracles. And all of a sudden on the day of the Annunciation, he becomes a Third Order Dominican, consecrated the other way as a Third Order. How powerful is that? If this is something, if I can't guarantee that my children will not veer from the right path, but if this is something that's going to bring them back, why not teach them the rosary? Why not inspire them? Why not put that on their soul already? Well, not only did he become a thorough Dominican, he was married to this widow, and the devout couple started a confraternity of the Rosary and searched for a painting of the Blessed Virgin to serve as a spiritual focus for the group. So they're moving forward. He got this painting. It says that he repaired it and had a more competent artist touch it up, and it was installed as at a ramshackle church, which he also repaired in October of 1873. Miracles were reported within hours of its installation. Seeing the devotion of the pilgrims, the Bishop of Nola encouraged Bartolo to construct a larger church. The born-again Catholic, as they call him, approached architect Giovanni Rispoli to build, saying, "In this place, selected for its prodigies, we wish to leave to present and future generations a monument to the Queen of Victories that will be less unworthy of her greatness, but more worthy of our faith and love." So we have this shrine, and this is all the power of the Rosary right here. He promulgates the Rosary. You go from apparently nothing to everything, to promulgating the Rosary for Our Lady. These are the important things that I think we need to think about this month of October. This is a powerful conversion story. And how did it start? It's not like we hear a lot of different lines of saints where we say, well, yeah, they never heard of God. They led a poor life. And then they came back they found the church and they came to the church. Okay. Or you hear lives, people who they were Catholic and they weren't doing so well, but boy, they became really fervent in their faith. Rarely do we hear of, and I think that we can really associate with and really relate to this story where how many of us were brought up Catholic? How many of us were taught the Catholic faith? How many of us went to Catholic school and all of a sudden really fell away from the faith in a really intense way? I'm not saying we became part of the Satanic Church, but a lot of times it'll happen where we're fully Catholic. We may pray the rosary a few times in grade school or as kids, or we went to confession. But then as we grew up, we started to divert and we started to not really have any fervent ideas about the Catholic faith. We started to not have the faith in the Catholic faith. And we started to leave our own lives, leave the church 180 even, and say, gosh, the church is bad. Is there hope for us? There is always hope for us. And there's hope for us in the rosary. We got to come back and remember God's not going to leave anybody alone, especially when we pray the rosary, because Our Lady made these promises. And here in the month of October, what I would say is, more than anything, let's teach the truth so that they carry that rosary in their heart, so that when they're older, like we are, and we want to start praying the rosary and now come to an understanding of, that's why it's important, they're not going to be left alone. If they ever feel like they're leaving the faith, they're going to come right back. And we played a hand in that. Until next time, until next week, this is Dr. Sandoval saying, keep it Catholic and pray your rosary.